This episode contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes which may be disturbing to some listeners.
Today, we're bringing you the story of a John Doe whose remains were uncovered on a remote property in the Arizona desert. As detectives begin piecing together the victim's identity and what may have happened to him, they uncovered information that sent this case in a shocking new direction.
This is APB Cold Case. Here's your host, former police chief Mark Spahn.
Our story begins in the rural desert community of Dolan Springs, Arizona, a remote area where even basic services can be few and far between. Out here, if something needs to be fixed on your property, chances are you're the one doing the work yourself. In the summer of 2021, a man we'll call Antonio was doing just that. He'd purchased a small home on North Drive about a year earlier to use as sort of a weekend getaway, and he'd periodically return there to work on the property. So on August 26, 2021, what started out as another routine day of repairs would soon take an unexpected turn. The project that day? Dig up a thin, ugly-looking slab of concrete next to the garage so they could plant a garden. And with the help of his son, Antonio started to break up the slab. It wasn't long before they made a startling discovery. Mojave County Sheriff's investigator Lori Miller.
So he and his son started to break up the concrete, and when he was clearing out the dirt, his shovel actually stuck to a sock. And when he cleared away the dirt and removed the sock from his shovel, he realized that there were human bones inside the sock because there were two legs attached to the sock.
Antonio called police, and the Mojave County Sheriff's Office responded.
Once they also confirmed it was human remains, they secured the scene and then obtained a search warrant and then proceeded to exhume the body. Now, the body, once they started clearing, was wrapped in a piece of carpeting, the top portion of the body, and it appeared to be a male, and he was wearing long underwear in addition to the black socks.
As they slowly removed the body from the concrete and desert soil, more evidence was uncovered. Evidence that would reveal what happened to this John Doe.
It appeared like his head was on a pillow, and they could see that his face and his head had experienced severe trauma, and also that there appeared to be fragments in the pillow, almost appearing like whoever this person was had been shot while their head was on the pillow. So it was assumed that he was sleeping at the time, and from all intents and purposes in their investigation, it looked like it had been a homicide.
At autopsy, the man was described as white or Hispanic, over the age of 40, about 5'7" to 5'9", and 150 pounds.
Cause of death was the gunshot wounds to the head. And in fact, when they exhumed the body, there was a fragment of like an automatic weapon magazine, just a piece of it was wrapped up around his head on the pillow.
Investigator Miller told us that according to a forensic anthropologist, the body had been buried for anywhere from 1.5 to 10 years. So now, detectives have their work cut out for them. They want to talk with previous owners of the North Drive property. The man who sold it to Antonio lived out of state, and apparently during his ownership, it had become a flophouse for any number of people and had been the subject of multiple calls to police. But the owners of the property prior to that were listed as B. and Alvin Hamilton. Thing is, the Hamiltons lived on the property more than 10 years before the body of John Doe was found, which was outside of the time frame estimated by the anthropologist. Detectives continued to work the case, but identifying the victim was proving difficult. According to a press release from the Sheriff's Office, in February 2023, Othram Incorporated, a genetic lab in Texas, offered to assist the Sheriff's Office in identifying the victim. Sheriff's investigators worked with the Othram genetic genealogist for over 2 years, contacting those with associated DNA matches to see if they might have any knowledge of the identity of the John Doe, but they received no significant leads. And then in 2025, investigators make a plea for information through social media. And lo and behold, a daughter of Alvin and B. Hamilton, the previous homeowners I mentioned, reaches out. Investigator Lori Miller.
When we put out the Facebook post in July, that's when one of B's daughters came forward and she left the voicemail saying, there was a gentleman who stayed on my mom's property who disappeared.
Investigator Miller verified that B. Hamilton was an actual owner of the property on North Drive back in 1999. And then B's daughter offers another bit of information that will change the course of the investigation. She gives Investigator Miller the name of the man that had been living with her mom.
When the daughter told me this name, Chett Williams, that he had in fact on old records listed that property as his residence address. Therefore, obviously, interest is piqued. We interview her, and that's when we get the information from her that her mom and her dad, her bio dad, were not really married. He was in and out of their lives. During that time, she met this Chett Williams, who was Chester G. Williams, who was a musician, a model, in his words. He did have headshots, an actor, did all that kind of thing.
So could this John Doe be Chett? We asked the investigator how B. Hamilton met Chester Williams.
From what I could gather from them, they had met somehow in Las Vegas. He was performing. She liked the slot machines and gambling. One of the daughters said it wasn't unusual for her to drop $10,000 to $15,000 in one night. But there was no real paper trail of employment history, and they all thought that it was Chett that was supporting her. So somehow, somewhere, I don't know how they met up, and he brought himself and all of his gear, performing gear, to that parcel there up in Dolan Springs.
So what was the attraction between these two?
No offense to the woman, she was not much of a looker. And he was a pretty good looking guy back in his day. I couldn't tell you what the attraction was. That's the great mystery. From all I can ascertain and what I can gather from the daughters, B. Hamilton was a very imposing woman. Nobody seems to know. I think she had one real job that they could recall in her lifetime. They never knew her to work, but she always seemed to have money. Sounds like, personally to me, she was a thief and a con woman. She had actually done prison time for theft.
Miller said it was around 1998 to 1999 when Chester Williams, or Chett as we'll call him, is believed to have moved from his home in Pennsylvania to Dolan Springs, Arizona. He was about 51 at the time. B. Hamilton would have been around 61. But according to police, one of B. Hamilton's daughters, we'll call her Brenda, said that Chett suddenly disappeared around November to December of 1999.
One night, she got a call from her mother that they had gotten into an argument and he had just up and left. And the other daughter got a frenzied phone call too and responded to the property. And when she responded to the property, it was all darked out. The gate was locked. She climbed the fence, at which time B tells her to go away, get off the property. So she leaves. And then all of a sudden, the next couple of days, Alvin is back in the picture.
Alvin Hamilton is B's on-again, off-again partner and the biological father of B's daughters. So when B's daughter, Brenda, finally goes over to her mom's house, she finds something strange about Chett's sudden departure.
All his musical equipment was still there. His tour bus was still there. His brand new Ford pickup truck was there. And if you look at this property isn't somewhere where you just walk down to the street corner and catch a bus. This is where you have to walk for miles to get out of it because it's located on a dirt road in 1-acre parcels.
So sometime in late 1999, Chett Williams disappears from B. Hamilton's property altogether, seemingly without warning, and all his personal belongings left behind. B's daughter saw something else she found odd.
she noticed that her mother and her bio dad, who is now back in the picture, had poured this awful concrete slab, and she was told that one of the pets had died and they had poured the slab to keep the wild animals from digging the animal up, the pet. So that's where we had a pretty good indication that it was probably Chester G. Williams.
But investigators needed to confirm it, and they also needed more information on the Hamiltons. Investigator Miller told me that Elvin Hamilton had a similar past to B's. He'd also done prison time for theft, and he didn't have an established residence or job. Miller also said that at some point after Chett's disappearance, B and Elvin gave the Dolan Springs property to one of their daughters while they began living in Chett Williams' tour bus on a property in Peach Springs, about 85 miles away. So let's get back to the timeline. You'll remember that the estimate for the time of death for John Doe was 1.5 to 10 years before the 2021 discovery of his remains. That would seemingly exclude Chett Williams as the John Doe because he disappeared in 1999, but investigator Miller believes there's a logical explanation for the discrepancy.
I'm wondering if the fact that the carpeting and the concrete preserved him to a degree. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm thinking that protected him from the elements, from the animals, from anything that would cause him to break down, and therefore threw the anthropologist off.
Now, one of B. Hamilton's daughters shared some photos with Miller, said to be of Chett. At that point in the investigation, investigator Miller located one of Chett's aunts back in his home state of Pennsylvania, and Miller asked her if she could confirm the identity of the man in the pictures. The first photo was of a man and a woman.
She said, yes, that's Chett, and that's Naoma.
The Naoma she's talking about is Chett's mother, Naoma Lipinski. Investigator Miller then finds one of Chett's sons to get more background.
He started to tell me about his dad leaving there in Pennsylvania, moving to Arizona, and then came back around 1999 with a person he called his significant other, and her name was B. Hamilton. And when they left to go back to Arizona, they took Chett's mother with them, who was Naoma Lipinski.
And then came a question that investigator Miller wasn't expecting.
So where is my grandmother? I don't know where your grandmother is. I said, well, did you ever file a missing persons report on her? And he said, no, we were estranged pretty much from my dad. When he left in 99, we thought that they didn't want anything more to do with us, that they were going to go on and live their, glorious life in Dolan Springs. So we never connected after that.
Naoma was 80 years old when she moved with her son Chett to B. Hamilton's house in Arizona. And according to her grandson, she had some serious health issues. Just a couple years earlier, Naoma had been in a car crash where she had to be extricated and airlifted to a hospital. The Philadelphia Inquirer News reported that Lipinski had been in critical condition after a 3-car crash in Montgomery Township, Pennsylvania.
She had just recovered from her injuries. That was the reason that he was taking her back to Dolan Springs with him to live with them.
Miller said that at one point, Naoma's grandson did speak with his grandmother on the phone.
She said they were in Dolan Springs. And so I asked him, did everything seem fine? And he said, yes, she didn't seem to be under duress.
Investigator Miller told us that on July 4th, 1999, someone had requested that Mojave County check on the welfare of Naoma Lipinski in Dolan Springs. But it appears that authorities were unable to make contact with her. The initial request was made by an unknown family member after learning that Naoma had signed a certain legal document. So what was this legal document? Well, about a month before police were asked to check on Naoma, a power of attorney was filed in Mojave County, Arizona, signed by Naoma Lipinski, giving B. Hamilton Williams authority to act on her behalf, and specifically for anything to do with the car crash where Naoma was seriously injured. We dug a little deeper and found a record indicating that B. Hamilton Williams was also added to the deed for Naoma's former home in Pennsylvania.
Naoma got a power of attorney and gave all her property over to B. Not to Chett, but to B in June.
Then, on October 7th, 1999, B. Hamilton Williams, acting as power of attorney, sold Naoma's home in Pennsylvania for $136,000. So B had not only acquired legal authority over Naoma's property and dealings, she was apparently using Chett's last name. Did they get married? Investigator Miller told us she could find no record of a marriage between the two.
So again, this goes back to the demeanor of B and what she was capable of, or what I think she was capable of.
And just what was she capable of?
And from, talking to the daughters, she was so imposing that it was like, no, you don't ask. If I tell you to do something, you do it. If I'm doing something, you cannot question what I'm doing.
So is that why Naoma signed everything over to B? Or could Naoma have been under the belief that she was being helped? We don't have any information about Naoma's actual physical condition during the time she was living in Arizona, only that it was just a couple years after a serious crash.
According to the grandson, they didn't think that she was going to live much longer after her injuries. So did she just die?
Investigator Miller tried to find out if Naoma's Social Security benefits were being paid from 1999 on, and if so, where were they mailed? But all she was able to find out is that someone had notified Social Security that Naoma had died on June 1st, 2013. But there was no obituary or record of her burial, and none of Naoma's Pennsylvania family was aware of her passing. I asked Investigator Miller if B. Hamilton's daughters were familiar with Naoma.
None of them ever met her, but one of the daughters remembers being up at the property and seeing an identification in her mother's picture on it, but it was in the name of Naoma Lipinski. So I'm wondering if she had assumed her identity. So then I proceeded to check vital records in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada to see if there was any death certificate issued for Naoma Lipinski. And to this day, I can't find anything that records her death. In fact, her husband is in a cemetery back in Pennsylvania, and the plot next to him is for her, and it's empty.
But Investigator Miller thinks she knows where Naoma is. And in August of 2025, she went back to the same place where they found the remains of John Doe in 2021. The first search turned up nothing, but 1 month later, there was a break in the case. John Doe was identified as Chester Chett Williams III, and that prompted a second search of the North Drive property.
We went out with 2 different sets of cadaver search dogs because obviously we thought if Chett's on the property, there's a good chance that Naoma's on the property too. And if you look at the garage, there was a Joshua tree. Chett was found to the right of the Joshua tree. We thought Naoma was probably to the left of the Joshua tree. The one dog doesn't see what the other dog's doing. Neither dog in both situations didn't seem interested anywhere on the property at all. However, they kept going to the fence line with the adjacent vacant lot next door, and there was a telephone pole and it had a bird feeder attached to it. And these dogs were leaping like 7 feet in the air. And I asked the dog handlers, are they trying to get to the bird seed? And that's where I got somewhat of an education. She said, as people decompose, they get absorbed up into the wood of plants and the vascular system. And so they're alerting to something is over there. So once we finished with the property where Chett was found, we kind of just slid over to the vacant lot next door, and both dogs, independently of each other, alerted to this bush that was about 5 feet away from that fence line. And these were formal alerts. We knew that there is a possibility that Naoma could be here. In essence, I wrote a search warrant on a vacant lot, and in November, we went back to the property with an excavator because we knew how hard the ground was.
And it was at this point in their third search at the property when they made a discovery.
Well, after hand digging and using the excavator and going through the dirt, all we came up with was a bone chip, a woman's sock, and a little piece of tarp. So we collected those items as evidence. And later, I spoke to a forensic anthropologist because I was asking her, could there have been human remains there? So she asked me a series of questions. She asked me, was there color change in the dirt? And I said, yes. I said, we hit a layer of white. And she said, that's caliche. And she goes, no, that wouldn't be her.
Investigator Miller just mentioned the word caliche. According to geology.com, caliche is commonly found in Arizona and other parts of the Southwest. It's sometimes called calcrete or hardpan and refers to a layer of minerals that have essentially been cemented together, usually by calcium carbonate. So, according to the forensic anthropologist that Investigator Miller was talking to, that caliche accounted for the layer of white that they found while digging. But what else did they find?
And then she said, was there an area where the dirt got really dark? And I said, yes. And that's when she said, that was probably her. And I said, could she have decomposed? She said, it's entirely possible. It's also possible that she wasn't buried really deep, that the animals had scavenged her.
The bone fragment they found was insufficient for identification, or even to confirm if it was human. But Investigator Miller's planning on going back and conducting a more extensive search, hoping to find something more definitive, something that will answer the question, where is Naoma Lipinski?
I want to dig literally and figuratively. I want to follow the animal trails. I want to look under the bushes. I want to see if I could come up with anything else that might, help me to identify her. Where we think Naoma was, it's just a vacant open field, open to all the elements, open to the animals, open to whatever runoff, the water once the monsoons come in. So,
as it turns out, Alvin Hamilton died in 2006. B. Hamilton, also known as B. Hamilton Williams, died in 2018 at the age of 81 after suffering from dementia. Investigator Miller presented the facts to the county attorney's office regarding the involvement of the late Alvin and late B. Hamilton in the murder of Chett Williams.
If they had been alive, they would have been charged. But since they're dead, that's not going to happen.
Investigator Lori Miller and her team are committed to finding Naoma. There's a sign in her office that's become the motto for the work they do at the Cold Case Unit in the Mojave County Sheriff's Office. It says, Justice for the Forgotten.
And that was Naoma. And now I can appreciate Naoma. You can appreciate Naoma. We know that she existed. And that's what I try to do for these people. You were a person. You existed. Somebody cares. Somebody has noticed that you walk this earth and you made an impact. They've impacted my life. I'll never forget them.
When we spoke with Investigator Miller about this case, which began as the recovered remains of Chett Williams and then turned into a possible second homicide investigation of an unreported missing person, it reminded us of another case we covered in Mojave County, the murder of a Jane Doe, which several years later resulted in an identification of the woman, but also the discovery that her babies had not been seen since the woman's disappearance. Thanks to Investigator Miller and her team, those babies, now in their 30s, were recently found alive, living under new names. You can hear about the twists and turns of that investigation in our episode, Missing in the Mojave, Who Killed Marina Ramos. But back to this case. In her later years, B. Hamilton was reportedly removed from a care facility after allegedly assaulting a resident and being arrested. To this day, it remains unclear whether B. and Chett were ever legally married, although B. appeared to adopt his last name for at least a period of time. Investigators say they're confident that B. and Alvin Hamilton are their suspects in the death of Chett Williams, but because they died before their alleged roles were uncovered, no indictment could be filed. The case will never see a courtroom. And the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Chett's mother, Naoma, are also viewed as highly suspicious. Although Chett reportedly brought his mom to Arizona, investigators still don't know when Chett himself was murdered and buried on the Hamiltons' property. In Naoma's case, investigators have focused on several troubling details. B. Hamilton had obtained power of attorney over Naoma's affairs and soon after carried out the sale of Naoma's Pennsylvania property. At the same time, Naoma was never seen again after leaving Pennsylvania to live in Arizona. Those circumstances have brought continued scrutiny toward the Hamiltons. Did Naoma also meet with foul play? Could her remains still be somewhere on or near the place where Chett was buried? Those are the questions investigators are still trying to answer.
There might be somebody who listens to this that can help me with a lead that will let me go take the next step. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for these people. I'm doing it now for Naoma.
If you have any information about Naoma Lipinski, Chett Williams, or about Alvin and B. Hamilton, Investigator Miller wants to hear from you. You can reach her at the Mojave County Sheriff's Office at 928-753-0753. For our show notes, including a map, who's who, timeline, and blog, go to apbcoldcase.com.
Thanks for listening to APB Cold Case. Tell us about your cold case at apbcoldcase@spawngroup.com. APB Cold Case is an original Spawn Group production.